Hi there, and welcome to this production analysis where we're going to be looking at the track by Dillon and Kill the Noise called Dill the Noise, looking at the arpeggiator sound they use in this track and recreate it using Native Instruments Massive. And here's the recreation. And then we were going to draw inspiration from the original track by Dillon and Kill the Noise and recreate our own arpeggiator sound in Massive. So I was listening to this track by Dillon Kill the Noise, and thought that arpeggiator sound is becoming very popular with a lot of electronic music today, electro, complextro, dubstep, even drum and bass. You're hearing a lot of arpeggiator sounds, so I thought it would be a cool tutorial to show you how to recreate them in Massive. So one of the first things I tried to do with recreating the arpeggiator sound was to get the MIDI sequence right as it was in the original. So you can see here I've got this pattern going from an F note, and then it's kind of rising up, coming back down again, then jumping up, and then going in the other direction, down and then up. And I actually used Melodyne on the original track to get the MIDI sequence right, and then I went ahead and loaded up a new instance of Native Instruments Massive, and the next thing to do was to get the sound a bit closer to how we have it in the original. I was listening to the original, I thought it's probably a sawtooth wave they used, and it sounded a little bit more pitched up and maybe a little bit more processed. So on this new instance of Massive, we're only going to be using this first oscillator here, and for starters we could take the pitch up by 1 octave, and a quick way of doing this is by holding Alt or Option, clicking and dragging up, and we can move an octave at a time there. Go over to the wavetable position, and at the moment it's halfway in between a square wave and a sawtooth wave, but we just want a sawtooth, so we can drag this all the way to the right, keep everything else as it is here, and we're not actually going to be using any filters to begin with for this sound, so we can leave this blank and move straight over to the effects section. And we could start off by putting a classic tube on there, because I heard a little bit of grittiness, I suppose not grittiness, but a little bit of distortion on that original arp. So load up that classic tube, keep the drive about halfway, and just pull the dry wet slider up to maybe about a third of the way up there. And next thing is maybe just add a little bit of reverb to the sound, just to give it a little bit more space, make it slightly more dramatic, you know, and keep most of these things the same. Just pull the dry wet slider up, pull the size down a little bit, and just maybe pull the density down a bit and push the colour up to just increase a little bit of top end in that reverb. Also give the sound a little bit of EQ, just a bit of high shelf. Pull the master down, because I notice we're going into the red there. And another thing I heard with the original was a little bit of glide, not a loads of glide, but just a little bit. So in order to recreate that glide, we need to make sure the synth's in monophonic. So it's only going to play one note at a time and glide in between those notes. If we set a glide, and we need to set the glide here in glide time. So obviously if you go, the further up you go, the slower the glide, the slower the transition between the notes, and you get that bendy kind of sound. But we only want just a tiny amount of glide really. And also we could look at the envelope, and in Massive the fourth envelope is the amp envelope, as you can see up here. And I think the only thing to do is here really is just to pull the attack up a little bit and maybe just push the sustain up, so we've just got a nice sustained note. And let's listen to that against the original. And so there we have the recreation of the arpeggiator used in the track Dill the Noise. And the next thing we're going to do is take it one step further, use some inspiration from that arpeggiator sound and create our own arpeggiator sound in Massive. So although Massive doesn't actually have a dedicated arpeggiator, we can mimic the behaviour of an arpeggiator using the stepper feature in Massive to modulate the pitch of an oscillator. So we can start here with this first LFO slot and change this from a normal LFO into a stepper here. And then what we can do is drag the crosshair of this stepper to the pitch of oscillator 1. So we're now modulating the pitch with this stepper, and we can take the modulation amount up by +12 using the same technique as we used before, holding down Alt or Option, clicking and dragging up. We can move it to +12 there, and then when we start setting some values in this stepper here, we're going to be affecting the pitch of this oscillator. So first thing we can do really here is sync it and then take the ratio to 1/16. So we're not actually going to have an effect yet when we play the note because we've not actually pulled any values up in here. So what we need to do is set an arpeggiator sequence. So what I'm going to do is call it so we're going to be looping over 8 steps rather than 16, and if I click and hold Alt and Option and click and drag up and down, I get an exact value rather than if I just click and drag up and down. You see, it's much more precise, but for this sound we want to be modulating an exact amount, because by going +12 there, I'm actually going +12 semitones on the pitch. So if I go +8 here, +5, keep that one at 0, the next one at +5, next one at 0, go +8 again, and +5. We actually have an arpeggiator riff that we've created in Massive, and this stepper here is basically mimicking this behavior of kind of gliding up and down with the notes by using that pitch modulation. So we actually have now created an arpeggiator in Massive. And so to recreate the glide sound that we had with that original sound, we can use this glide mod here, this slider, that is actually not going to affect any of the notes or the steps here until we activate them underneath this little box here. So now by clicking and highlighting all of these boxes and having this glide modulation up here, we get much more glide in between the notes. So we could keep it as a subtle amount like we did before, and then we can take this sound one step further by activating one of these filters here. So if I put in filter 1 slot a daft filter, move the mix slider so it's going to be mixed, so we're just hearing filter 1 now, push the volume of the filter up, and now the filter's it's filtered the sound right out there. So what we can do is modulate this cutoff here with another LFO, and this time I'm going to make it a performer and sync the performer again. You can push the ratio to 1/16 and then drag this performer to modulate the cutoff of filter 1, and then click and drag up, modulation amount up. And now these envelope shapes here are acting as a volume modulation for the cutoff frequency. So we can actually create a pretty cool pattern here by changing some of these curves in this performer. So if we hit the load curve button, and then we get this selection of curves here. So if I select this one and keep the second sort of performer shape as the same, and then highlight that one again, and then I can click and drag across, and I can change a number of these performer shapes in one time. And just by experimenting with some different shapes, I can create quite a cool little pattern sequence. So let's give this a spin. And then we've got a cool thing here, because we've got no filter loaded into the second filter slot. Pull the volume of this up, and we have a nice mix slider between this performer kind of pattern and just a clean arpeggiated pattern. Okay, so that's moved this simple sequence that I had before, these note sequences here. Play this with the beat. Okay, so there we have the arpeggiated sound where we've taken the Dill noise track and recreated the arpeggiator used in that track, and then drawn inspiration from that and created our own arpeggiator sound and performer sequence inside Native Instruments Massive. So thanks for watching this tutorial. I hope you found it insightful and useful, and hope to see you again soon. Cheers.